Hello, welcome to another episode of the Chaplain's Den. So today we're doing what seems like a pretty simple question, but it's actually a good question because it's a very important one. It seems pretty basic, and yet it's amazing how many people, both in the church and outside the church, get it wrong. So the question is simple: what is a Christian? Well, a Christian, first off, just to give you a very quick context of the historical aspect, Jesus never said anything about being a Christian. That's not something that was done. He didn't set up. He set up the system of how we worship and how the early church began. It started through Jesus's teachings and through the apostles, where we see that. But the term Christian didn't come from that. It's one of those terms that a lot of time historically we see a term come from actually not a group of people, but from their opponents, from their enemies. So if you go back, Jesus was a Jew, and he wasn't breaking from the old system. He's basically saying this is the correct version of that. This is how it's supposed to be done. This is how you're supposed to look at things, and so it is a new teaching, and yet it's not breaking from the old pattern. But the thing is that what happens is we see the division where, of course, there's the power in the temple that doesn't want to let go of their system. They worry about this new group, this new sect, as it's often referred to, and so they want to break of that. So we see right away that Jesus is under attack for his teachings and his way of life, and the apostles are quickly under attack for the same thing. And so the Christians were persecuted very early on. So that's why they're given their own title. Who are these people? Are they just a new group? There's a lot of, historically in the Bible and through other sources, we know that there were different groups out of the Jewish faith. Some that followed pretty closely, and some that kind of went off track and got it wrong. And that's how they're viewing Christians. You guys are going off, getting it way wrong. You're completely off base. And so they started to call them Christians, which was followers of Christ. Now, it's one of those things that when you look at it, why would they adopt a term that is from their opponents, from their enemies? Well, first off, they don't see them as enemies. They see them as people that they're not understanding the teaching, but you hope that they do. So you have to remember that the early Christians, some of them were Greek, Roman, different cultures, but at the same time, a lot of them had been Jews previously. They were Jews that had converted over. So the reason that they're no longer Jews is because the Jewish system is pushing them out. If you're going to go that way, we're going to push you out. We're going to categorize you as Christian. But for Christians, it wasn't a bad thing. The term Christianity is, of course, what is it? You're a follower of Christ. And that really is the best term for it. So whether you're in the church or outside the church, that is absolutely the best term. Because what is a Christian person? They're somebody who follows the teachings of Christ. They know the teachings of Christ, and they do them. And those are the key things that you have to remember. There's all kinds of people, and listen, before I was a Christian, I did the exact same thing where it's like, okay, I go to church and I see these Christians and they're acting like what? Well, if that's Christianity, I don't want anything to do with it. And we see all kinds of arguments where people are like, well, if you look historically at some of the atrocities, the Spanish Inquisition, these are a bunch of Christians doing an absolute terrible thing. Well, the simple fact of the matter is they're not Christian. They call themselves Christian. They work with or through the church, however it's set up. But the simple fact is, and this is why the Bible makes the point that there's people who are who are truly of the church, which is believers, and there's people that are not. And they might, the Bible's the first one to say, listen, some of these people have gone to church their whole lives, and they're never going to be true believers. Some of these people have done all kinds of work, through charities or other things all their life, and they're not true believers. Some of them have huge titles, there's no question that you can go through the list of titles of people that have sainthoods and people that have been pope and everything else that, you see some great examples, you see terrible examples, you see really, really weak examples. So, in that sense, the world is like, well, that's those people are hypocrites, so Christians are hypocrites. Now, if you study the Bible, you see that that's exactly what happens. There's people that are hypocrites throughout. The Bible tells us very clearly, if you're a true believer of God, there are people who honestly believe. There are people who will kill you, maim you, prosecute you, do anything they can to destroy you, and they will honestly believe that they are doing God's work while they do it. The Bible clearly says that. So they're not at all, but that's the case in point. So how can Christians do terrible things? Like, say, we use the Spanish Inquisition as an example. They can't. Should we analyze people's beliefs and see if they match the faith? Obviously that's one category, but then if you say that we're going to torture them to find out the truth, or we're going to maim them, we're going to do these terrible atrocities to them, there's just no way. Because you say, well, how could that person be a follower of Jesus when Jesus didn't push onto anybody his faith, let alone try to do it through force or through intimidation or through threats? So if people are doing that, they can call themselves Christians all day long. They're not Christians. We see all kinds of people today that I know a friend. I hope someday they wake up to it, because they don't see it. But they're one of those people. If somebody says, "Are you a Christian?" they'll say, "I'm a Christian," and they're very quick. Here's the things that I don't agree with in the Bible. Society doesn't agree with these things right now. I'm 100% with them. And here's the teachings that I don't agree with. Well, then you're not a Christian. If you can look at Jesus and say, okay, you got to agree. You got to be 100% all in, or you're not, right? That's just a simple analogy. I think of like a sports coach. If you're one of those people that are like, I'll listen to the coach on these things, but I'm going to ignore him or do my own thing when it comes to this, you're going to be off the team, right? Very, very simple. Christianity, that's the problem, is you've got a lot of people who are like, I'm going to claim to be Christian, but I'm going to make up my own rules, aka religion, right? We make it up as we go along. I remember somebody was telling me about a guy who was made a deacon of the church, and like right away he sends out a letter like, okay, from now on, and didn't even talk to the other deacons about it. Right away he's like, so this is how I want to see people dress. I want to see people show up 20 minutes early for church. I want to see this. I want to see this. I want to see this. This isn't somebody saying this is what Jesus wants us to do. This is my version is this. And so it's important. It's important to see if you're a person outside of the church, realize you need to learn about Jesus, not about me, not about other people. It's not about what I'm doing or saying. It's not about what other people are doing or saying. It comes down to Jesus. If I'm saying something that is contradictory to him, then I am not speaking Christianity. It's just that simple. If I'm doing something that's contradictory to what he would do, it's not Christianity. There was a guy that was using the example in the Old Testament. They were talking about stoning people. So how can Christians stone people? Well, they don't. It doesn't, there's a reason why. When you went to Christianity, there's a reason why all that stuff is left behind. And the thing is, it's not that they're wrong, it's that they're ignorant because they don't know better. Jesus was the first person to say, when he's put in a situation where they're talking about stoning somebody, Jesus had the famous quote, "Let he without sin cast the first stone." So he's making the point, if you think it's right, ask yourself that. If that person should be condemned because they've done a sin, are you without sin? No. So what, we're going to throw stones at that guy, and then as soon as we're done, we're going to throw stones at you? Start using your head. And that's a lot of what Christianity is, using your head. The concepts were there, people weren't understanding them. People want to see, and they do it today, absolutely. They see what they want to see. This is why you have so many different churches with so many different rules. Some have dress codes, some have different rules on conduct. It's all stuff that's been added to it because we want to focus on the rules that we think should apply, and we're not focusing on what Jesus talks about, and that's the most important thing. So like I say, if you're outside the church, do yourself a favor and find out about Jesus. I always say to people, read the Gospels. If you have a problem with Jesus, then you have a problem with Christianity. If you have a problem with people in the church or the church groups or church thinking, that's not Christianity. That's those people that you have a problem with. If they're doing exactly what Jesus told them to do and you have a problem with that, then you have a problem with Christianity. Otherwise, you have a problem with Bill and Jeff, who are doing their own things. And like I say, I've done it too. I went to church and left for a while because I was like, if that's the way Christians act, then why would I want to be a Christian? Doesn't make any sense. Do yourself a favor and look it up. If you are a Christian, absolutely, you have to know, who am I following? What example am I supposed to be doing? I've got a list of rules and regulations. Which ones are actually Christian and which ones are coming from Deacon Bill? That's something that you have to know. And you have to start, honestly, you got to start growing a spine. Christians have to start growing a spine and saying, if that's not the right way, I'm not going to do it. There was a church that I used to go to. They had there was a women's group, and it was led by one of the church pastors was a female pastor, and nothing against women, but she was a terrible teacher. It was all fluff, and they would do these long written out prayers. And if you know the Bible says not to do that. You're just being fake. You're just trying to show off with these long, elaborate written prayers. And it was funny because there was one woman in the group. There were 6 people that got up and did this. It took like 20 minutes to go through all these prayers. One girl went up very quick, very concise, which is exactly the way she talks. So it's 100% genuine. And so she's making the point of this group, I disagree with what you're doing. Even though the pastor says that's the way it should be done, I disagree with that. I'm going with the Bible. I'm going with the Word of God. I'm following the message of Jesus. I'm not following these other people. So when you ask yourself, what is a Christian? That's it. There's nothing that people didn't have a problem with Jesus. They're challenged by him, and they don't like that. When you actually look at it, what did he do that we disagree with? Nothing. What did he say that we disagree with? Nothing. How did he react to other people? He was always loving and trying to teach people, And that's the thing we have to focus on as Christians, Try to get it right. Make sure that we're following who we're supposed to be following. So that's the message for today. I hope that helps. I hope it clears up some thoughts on both ends of the scale for people. And God bless on your journey. Thanks.